Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another round of Training Tuesdays. My name is Jayson Speer, and I'm a BMS support specialist at Broadloom. This week, we're going to take a look at Excel exports as well as CSV files that you can get from your BMS software. It's going to be a very basic look with some Excel tips and tricks, as well as just how to export most of these reports from your BMS software. I would like to preface this by saying that you can export these to any kind of spreadsheet software, whether it's Google Sheets, Numbers, Libre, but due to my own familiarity, I'm going to be sticking with Excel. So with that said, let's dive right in. I am in a training system that we use internally, and I'm going to start by hopping into sales analysis. Now, right off the bat, you have probably noticed a screen where you can either select Excel or any of your other mapped printers. Now, just for demonstration's sake, I'm going to select a printer that is not Excel. And if you're familiar with sales analysis, then the screen is pretty, understandable. But for those who aren't, sales analysis is a pretty flexible and robust report that allows us to export your costs, your totals, and profit margins and whatnot based on a variety of filters and slices like this. So for my first selection, I'm going to go with product type. And for my second selection, I'm going to go with vendor, just for some data to really populate in there. I'm also going to select the date, and I'm going to change it back to March of last year. Let's just get the whole last year. Once I've selected my selections and I have picked my dates, I'm going to hit generate screen. Now, this is sales analysis. Has your quantities, your sale amounts, cost amounts, etc. And then the cool part is that if you double click, you can drill down towards vendors. So we only have one vendor for cabinets, but you get the basis. Now, these can be exported to Excel by clicking this little Excel button I was talking about. Now, sales analysis is special in that there's kind of two different ways you can print it. I'm going to print both of them just to kind of show you guys the difference here. First, I'm going to toggle make flat file of all levels and data. And that will populate pretty quickly. And let's see here. While I'm at it, actually, I'm going to also populate the other one. So let's start with the non-flat file. If you pick to Excel export a non-flat file, you will notice that we actually only have that first selection, which is my product types. But if you instead populate it with the flat file, which is this one right here, you can see that it opens all of the selections. Now, obviously, the three that are NA, I didn't fill in, and so there's not really much else to filter it by. But it does have my product types as well as my vendors. Now, for just a little basic, cleaning up and formatting here, I'm going to start by moving these branches and dates out of the way. Now, I know what branches I printed it out of, and obviously I know the date range I printed it, but that's kind of useful information. So I'm just going to move them here. And I'm also going to move this one here. Now, I am using Control and X, which is the hotkey for cut, but obviously you can use the ribbon up here, and you can also utilize, right-click, cut. And then I'm pasting them with Control V, which yet again can be done the same as right-clicking and paste. So now that I've gotten those out of the way, I'm actually going to select these first rows because I kind of like having my header boxes towards the top, and I'm going to delete them. This can either be done by right-clicking and going to delete, or you can also go to the format up here and hit delete. So now that we have those out of the way, our headers are at the top here. I'm actually going to also delete these columns right here because they're of no real use as I didn't use them for a selection. So now that we have just our data that we're really wanting to look at here, I am going to actually use another couple of hotkeys to select all of my data, which is Control A. So if you click in to any cell that has data in it and you hit Control A, it will actually kind of spread out like in a minesweeper effect and hit all of the other, areas that have data connected to that information. And once I've done that, I'm going to use another one, which is Alt HOI. Now that's a kind of a more complex one, but basically all I did is I went into Format and I auto fit column width. That's what Alt HOI does. So if you haven't noticed, it makes it so those pound signs or hashtags or whatever you want to call them are no longer there. Those only show up when you don't have the width necessary to actually show you the data. But now I have a full view of everything I need to see. Another interesting aspect is these actually expanded pretty far, which is kind of funny considering, it's only a couple of letters. But it looks like we have some trailing spaces here. And so what I'm going to do to get rid of those is I'm going to hit Control and F, which is find. But you can also do that by going to this little hourglass here, hit find and select, and I'm actually going to go to replace by going to select these columns, and I'm going to go to replace, and I'm going to put a space in this find what, and I'm going to put nothing in this replace. So what I'm basically telling it to do is find all of the extra spaces in these two rows, and I'm going to hit replace all. So one consequence of that, if you didn't notice, is it did get rid of all of these spaces. See, there's no extra spaces here, but I wasn't being careful. And it also took my space from product type. But that's no worries. That's kind of why we need to be careful. And I could have probably excluded this cell before I actually did the find and replace. So now that I have those extra spaces out of the way, I'm going to once again go Alt HOI. And look, it actually properly spaces it together. So all I see is, the required amount of space. Now that I have my table kind of formatted how I want it, I'm actually going to go down here to the bottom of my, sale quantity. Actually, to make it even easier, so we're not scrolling up and down the whole time, I'm going to highlight all of these little boxes up top, my headers. I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to come over here to Freeze Panes. If I freeze the top row, I can now scroll down, and I'll know at least every header, so I actually know what these columns are for. I now know that these are my sale quantities, my amounts, my cost amounts, profit, and so on and so forth. Now, for just some basic data analysis, I'm going to show you guys the formulas that you can use. They're pretty basic auto sum formulas, for example, where you can go up to the formulas in your ribbon and you can hit sum. And now, if you notice, it takes basically the top cell or the cell right above where I put that sum feature, and it goes until it hits an empty space. Unfortunately, it looks like on this alpha vendored tile, we didn't have a sale amount. And so that's blank and it stops it. But that's okay. We can modify this by changing it to F2, as I know my F1 would be my header of sale amount. You can hit enter, and voila, you have your total sale amount for all of your product types. You can also, if you want to make it a little easier, a little, cleaner to read, you can use your data types right here. Right now, it's just a general data type. But I would like to go with, currency or accounting, one of these that kind of makes it just a more legible format of, hey, there's $, commas, etc. Now, we can also do any of these other features. So maybe we wanted to get the average cost. Thankfully, there's no empty spaces until we hit G2, actually. So you can see it's taking the average from G3 to G45. And so I will hit enter, and voila, we have 7,220.09 cents as our average cost. One thing to note, actually, though, is if you actually take the top of your data here and you select the entire line, you will have your sum as well as your average displayed in this little taskbar at the bottom, as well as a count of however many cells. So you don't have to do the auto sums and whatnot unless you're sending it to somebody, but if you wanted a quick average count or sum yourself, select that data and it'll populate down here in the bottom to show you exactly what you need to know. One more thing I thought of would be, I'm seeing some high level, well, technically low margins on some of these products. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to type equals min. Now you start any formula with equals. Min means give me the minimum. And so since I know that my column is I, and I know the first one is a header, I'm going to go min of I2 to I45. And that's basically saying, give me the lowest thing we can find in between those two cells. 380.81. That's some pretty bad margin. So another thing we can do is say this is a huge row. Say this has, thousands or hundreds or whatever it is. It's a large amount of data. We can go into our home. We can go over here to sort and filter. I'm going to hit filter. Now what that does is that allows you to then filter this by whatever numbers you want. So say I specifically want to see that 380, well, type in 380 and it will narrow down the search so you can specifically target that 380. I'll hit select all because I only want to see that 380, and then I'll check that 380 and hit OK. So we now can see that the product type of adjust with the vendor of labor/special is really hitting us hard on our profit margins. And that's something that you could use to possibly dig into, hey, start looking into your jobs of what's causing these lower margins, or what's, really hitting us harder. Where are we getting the most profit out of this? I'm going to pivot away from sales analysis a little bit now. And I'm actually going to point out something that I did notice when I first said that most of our reports do have that little Excel button. There is one that does not, that I remember seeing. And so I'm going to go into our invoice register history, I believe it is. And I'm going to make sure that I choose Excel as my printer this time. Because like we said, most of your exports can be exported to Excel as long as you're using that Excel printer. And so just to make sure I get enough data, I'm going to go back another year and I'm going to print it with wide open filters. Let's see if that populates for me. Awesome, it did. And so you can see that despite the fact there's no little Excel button there, as long as you choose Excel as your printer, you should be able to properly print that out to Excel. One thing I would like to talk about is data types once again. I'm going to delete this here because I know a customer recently brought up data types, and it was actually an invoice dating because they were trying to use a formula to calculate the difference between, certain times and certain dates, probably get the difference between how long it took to bill a job. But you can also use these different number formats. So obviously you can do your short date, you can do your long date, but that's a big one. One thing to notice is that you can also, and I'm going to use Control to click this so I don't format this top column. You can also go here to this data types and go down to number formats, and you can put in custom data formats. So I'm going to click date, and I'm going to go down here to custom actually. And so it's month, date, year. Personally, I like deleting 0. So I'm going to actually go month, month, date, date, wrong way, date, date, and then year, 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 year. Once I hit OK, you'll now see that that auto-populates that leading 0, and it is all in the same format. One last piece I wanted to touch upon, because they kind of go hand in hand, is our special functions, customer-facing CSV imports. We are able to import a variety of data, and this is great if you have a good amount of changes you want to make in bulk. So that way you're not going between, each piece of, material or certain customers or whatever it is you're looking to change, to be honest. We have a list of examples up here, so that way you can actually see the format of the import. And I picked material catalog as my example, and it just populated here. So once again, I'm going to Alt A, and I'm going to, or Control A, Alt HOI, and make them a little bigger just so I can kind of see the things we're looking for here. But for this export or import in particular, you'll need your product type, your style name, your color name, and quite a few things you haven't noticed. But that's okay because this export can actually be gotten from your catalog listing. I'm going to show you that right now. And so to get your catalog listing and that material export, you're going to go to Inventory Control. You're going to go to Inventory Reports, and then we're going to go to Catalog Listing. And let's just select Excel as a printer to be safe. Let's see. This is pretty simple. You can obviously filter it to whatever product codes you want, your product types, and I'm honestly going to narrow it down a little bit just due to the fact that it can be a pretty sizable export depending upon how many items you are trying to put out. And so I will go with product code 1 and I will do product type carpet. But this right here is the key. You're going to want to make sure you choose this export print Excel only. Once you do that, you can hit the little Excel button or print, since I chose Excel as my printer, and it will populate for you. Now, this is the information in my catalog. It has exported with all the current fields that you have in your system, whether you have the sold by box flag on, perhaps you have, vendor IDs, your costs, whatever it is you're wanting to update. So this is a good place to show you, well, I'm first going to actually make a table instead of a filter, because what I was going to do is I was going to change our freight. So, this $1 freight here, or this one freight, maybe we, got something from our logistics company and we need to bump it up a little bit. You can either obviously create a filter right here so that you're only specifically looking for those with 1. But another option, and this is one I prefer because it automatically adds those filters to the top, and it's a little simpler, is I like to hit Control A, which will, like I said earlier, get all of your data that is connected, and then hit Control T. Now, this is basically saying, where's the data for your table? And also, my table has headers. This way, if I hit OK, it will create a table for me, which automatically resizes your columns or your widths. It will also give you headers that you can then filter down by, same as, the filters do. And in my opinion, the color does help me kind of differentiate the next lines, and it just makes it a little easier overall. So now that I have my freight with a very working header and filter, I'm going to say every one that has only 1. Okay, pretty simple. Now we see there are 10 lines that have a freight of 1. It's much quicker to be able to say 1.2 or whatever your freight change might be. Hit Control and Control C to copy and Control V to paste. Another option obviously could be to select all of these lines again, and we could do the same route of excluding that header, going up here to our find and select, and you could replace those values. But personally, that can get a little hairy, as you saw in my first example, where I end up losing a space from my header. And I like to be a little more thorough, if slower, to do so. So now that I've changed all of this freight of my 10 items, I can then save this, and I would be able to go back into my special functions, my customer-facing CSV imports, and then I would be able to import that by going to Catalog Material. You would select your file to import, and then you would be able to hit Import. I don't actually want to do that just because I don't really want to mess up the data in our training system here, but it's a pretty simple process, and it would actually throw any invalid codes or any invalid issues, in which case you're able to track down and find out what might have went wrong. Perhaps you put in an incorrect value, perhaps you put in something that doesn't fit in that cell, and it'd work pretty well. Now, that is all I have to say as far as Excel exports and importing. It's, like I said, a very basic overview with a couple Excel tips and tricks peppered in. But to be honest, it's an understatement to say that Excel runs the world. Spreadsheets are pretty important, and a quick internet search will probably provide a much better overview than I can give you. But I do recommend beefing up on pivot tables and VLOOKUPs or XLOOKUPs as well, because they're kind of the next step up, and they're actually able to help you really play with your data and kind of get to the nitty-gritty of things. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to support at our web form, our official support email of support@broadloom.com, or our phone line at 800-777-4107. I appreciate you all sticking around to learn a little bit about Excel, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.